My name is Nora Caldwell, and I was 32 years old the year I learned exactly what a simple manila folder could do to a family. It didn't just expose a betrayal, it triggered a financial execution that burned my brother's million-dollar development company to the ground, turned my parents into social outcasts, and left my mother sobbing hysterically in a room full of cold-faced strangers. If you think your own flesh and blood wouldn't cross the ultimate line for a payday, you are about to see how far greedy people will go when they think no one is looking. But more importantly, you're about to see what happens when they try to exploit a vulnerable 79-year-old woman who happened to be 10 steps ahead of them from the very beginning. It all started on a crisp Saturday evening in October. It was my grandmother Lorraine's 79th birthday. She had spent the entire morning baking her signature vanilla cake with buttercream roses, a recipe she had perfected before I was even born. She had set the kitchen table for 8 people. She brought out her finest porcelain plates, laid down neat paper napkins, and arranged a beautiful centerpiece of dried hydrangeas from her garden. But by 8 p.m., the candles had melted down into the frosting. The ice cream had completely turned to liquid. The house was entirely silent. Nobody came. My parents were hundreds of miles away, skiing in Aspen, Colorado. My brother Aaron sent a text at 4:15 p.m. that read, "Happy birthday, Gran. Skiing is amazing." My father didn't text at all. My mother, Diane, didn't even bother to call. Instead, she posted a selfie in her designer ski goggles to her church group chat with a single caption, "Blessed." I drove 3 long hours from Hartford after completing my shift at an elder law firm, only to find her sitting all alone at the head of that massive, empty table in her lavender cardigan. She looked up at me, her eyes cloudy and disoriented, unsure if I was even real. I cut us both a slice of cake, and I sang happy birthday to her twice because halfway through, she forgot where she was and asked me to start over. But the real story began the next morning. While I was helping her clean the kitchen, 2 absolute strangers knocked on the front door. They didn't bring flowers or birthday wishes. Instead, they handed me a thick, heavy manila folder, sealed with a wax flap and signed across the back in my grandmother's unmistakable, deliberate handwriting. What was hidden inside that folder would permanently end my family as I knew it. Welcome back to Revenge Stories, where ordinary people set quiet boundaries that change everything, and dignity always gets the last word. If stories about standing up for the people who can't protect themselves hit close to home, drop a comment right now, hit that like button, and subscribe. You're going to want to hear every single detail of how this layout unfolded. To understand why my family did what they did, you have to understand who the Caldwells of Briarwood, Connecticut are. We are a specific kind of comfortable. My father, Gregory, managed regional accounts for an insurance brokerage until he could comfortably golf 3 times a week and call it consulting. My mother, Diane, was obsessed with social status. She organized charity galas, sat on the local library board, and treated life like a permanent popularity contest. Then there was my brother Aaron. Aaron ran a small construction development firm called Aaron Caldwell Properties. He drove a flashy German sedan that cost more than my entire annual salary, and he carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his life. And then there was me, Nora, the paralegal. I worked at a tiny 4-person elder law firm in Hartford, handling wills, trusts, and guardianship filings. I earned $47,000 a year and spent my nights drinking stale coffee, studying for the bar exam. At family dinners, my mother would tilt her head, smile condescendingly, and tell her wealthy friends, "Nora is still doing her little legal assistant thing," as if I were selling handmade friendship bracelets at a local farmer's market. I never argued. I just kept my head down. I read fine print. That was my job. But while they looked down on me, my grandmother's house was the only place that ever felt like home. I took my very first steps on that kitchen linoleum. My grandma Lorraine taught me how to read contracts on the back porch when I was 19, a red pen gripped between her teeth. She even co-signed my very first apartment because my parents refused to help me. On Sunday night, after the disastrous birthday, I lay awake in her guest room, tracing a familiar crack in the ceiling. Around midnight, I went downstairs to get a glass of water. As I passed the hallway shelf, I noticed a framed family photograph had been slightly shifted. Tucked directly behind it was a glossy business card, Brenda Voss, Voss and Dean Realty. On the back of the card, a handwritten note read, "Comp value $680,000. Quick cash, close possible." My stomach dropped. Briarwood was an expensive area, and my grandmother's property was sitting on a highly desirable quarter-acre lot. But this was her home. She was still living in it. Why was a real estate agent running a valuation on it? The next morning, while Lorraine was dozing in her recliner, I went out to take the recycling to the curb. That's when I saw it. Tucked neatly behind the hydrangea bushes, clamped directly onto the side of the gas meter, was a realtor's combination lockbox. Someone had been quietly bringing strangers through my grandmother's house. I rushed back inside and began digging through the unsorted pile of mail on the hallway credenza. Buried deep between a cable bill and a coupon flyer, I found an off-market listing sheet printed on Voss and Dean Realty letterhead. It listed 14 Oakwood Lane for $680,000, nearly $50,000 below market value for a quick sale. But the absolute worst of it was hidden in the kitchen junk drawer. Wrapped in a rubber band was a formal purchase agreement from an entity called Stonewall Capital Group LLC, a cash buyer investment firm known for flipping properties. The seller's signature line was left completely blank, but someone had penciled L. Caldwell in block letters beneath the line, like a rehearsal for a forgery. The designated seller's representative listed on the legal document wasn't my grandmother. It was my brother, Aaron Caldwell. The closing date was targeted for November 15th. That was exactly 3 weeks away. They were planning to evict a 79-year-old woman with failing memory from her own home, sell it off to fund their own lifestyle, and they hadn't said a single word to her. I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by a paper mosaic of betrayal, the lockbox code, the listing sheet, the purchase agreement, and a sticky note in my mother's elegant handwriting that read, "Closing target November 15th. Move L to facility before Thanksgiving." At 6 p.m. that evening, I called my mother. "Oh, Nora." Diane's voice boomed through the receiver with that fake, practiced warmth she usually reserved for church volunteers. "How is Gran doing?" "Oh, we had the absolute most divine time in Aspen. The snow was just magnificent." "Mom," I cut in, my voice deadpan. "Why is there a realtor's lockbox clamped to Grandma's gas meter?" The line went completely dead. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. I could hear the faint clink of a wine glass on her end. When she spoke again, the fake warmth was entirely gone. It was replaced by her sharp, managerial tone. "Sweetheart, that is being handled. Your father and Aaron have been working with a lovely agent to find a suitable transition plan for your grandmother. You know she can't keep up with that massive house on her own anymore. There is an unsigned purchase agreement from Stonewall Capital in her kitchen drawer, Mom. Aaron is listed as the seller's representative. Grandma doesn't even know her house is on the market, does she?" "Nora, listen to me," Diane hissed, her voice dropping a register into pure frost. "This is a private family decision between your father, your brother, and me. We have been managing Gran's affairs for months. The truth is, Aaron's construction company is going through a very difficult stretch, and he needs liquidity. This house sale will fund a proper care facility for Gran and help your brother get through a rough patch. It is the responsible thing to do. It is her house, Mom. Not yours. Not Aaron's. Nora, my mother snapped, completely dropping the mask. Your grandmother has dementia. She leaves the stove burning. She got lost driving to a post office 2 blocks away last month. She is legally incompetent and should not be making decisions about a $680,000 asset. The harsh reality is, she won't even remember this house by Christmas. My grip tightened on the phone. My heart was pounding, but my mind went entirely clear. The years of reading fine print, the late nights studying elder law, it all synthesized into a cold weapon. Then it's a very good thing that I remember, I said quietly. And I hung up the phone. The very next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, took the heavy manila folder the strangers had left on the porch, and drove straight to Asylum Avenue in Hartford. The business card belonged to Ruth Adler of Adler and Associates Elder Law and Estate Planning. When I walked into her office, Ruth met me in a quiet conference room. She poured a pot of Earl Grey tea and placed a box of tissues between us on the table. Your grandmother came to see me exactly 14 months ago, Nora, Ruth began, her voice measured and calm. It was early August of last year. She had just suffered a severe episode where she got disoriented driving, ended up 2 towns over, and couldn't figure out how to get home. A kind neighbor brought her back. She called my office the very next morning. She came in alone, dressed in her best slacks and pearl earrings. She was terrified. Of the dementia? I asked. No, Ruth replied, folding her hands over her briefcase. She was terrified of your mother. She sat right where you are sitting and told me, my son Gregory will do whatever Diane tells him to do, and Diane will sell my house the absolute second I am too weak to stop her. She wanted to build a legal fortress around her home before her mental window closed forever. Ruth pulled out a carbon copy of the documents from her own files and slid them across the table toward me. She chose you, Nora. Specifically you. She told me you were the only person in the family with a spine, and the only one who truly understood what that house meant. And she drew up a masterclass of legal architecture. As a paralegal, I recognized the documents immediately. They were flawless. Item number 1. A revocable living trust. On August 9th of last year, Lorraine had legally transferred the deed, the title, and the entire ownership of 14 Oakwood Lane out of her individual name and into the Lorraine E. Caldwell Revocable Living Trust. She was the primary trustee, but the document explicitly named me, Nora Caldwell, as the sole successor trustee. The moment she became incapacitated, total legal control of the house passed entirely to me. Not my father. Not Aaron. Me. Item number 2. A durable power of attorney, naming me as her sole financial and healthcare agent, surviving any future mental incapacity. Item number 3. The Golden Shield. A formal, comprehensive neurocognitive evaluation letter from Dr. Helen Mercer, Lorraine's long-term neurologist, dated August 9th, the exact same day the trust was signed. The letter explicitly stated that Mrs. Lorraine Caldwell possessed full testamentary capacity, completely understood the nature of the trust, and was of perfectly sound mind when she placed her house into the trust. Ruth looked at me over her reading glasses. Technically speaking, Nora, your grandmother doesn't own that house anymore. The trust owns it. And under Connecticut law, a person holding a personal power of attorney over an individual has absolutely zero authority over assets that have already been transferred into a valid trust. Only the trustee can authorize a sale. And right now, because of her advanced decline, that trustee is you. This means your brother Aaron is trying to sell a house he has absolutely no legal right to touch. Ruth leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. But you need to be careful. If your family is this desperate, they may have tried to get her to sign something recently while her mind was foggy. We need to find out what they have up their sleeves. I drove back to Briarwood that evening. When I walked into the house, I found my grandmother sitting in her recliner. For a brief moment, the fog in her eyes cleared, replaced by a crystalline sharpness. "You went to see Ruth, didn't you?" she whispered, her thin voice carrying a sudden, fierce strength. "You remember Ruth, Gran?" "I remember enough," she said, turning her reading glasses over in her hands. "I remember I was scared, and I went to a lawyer, and I told her exactly what Diane would try to do to me. Did I get it right, Nora?" I sat on the arm of her couch and squeezed her fragile hand. "You got it exactly right, Gran. You protected us." "Good," she nodded, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Because they've been bringing strangers through my kitchen on Tuesdays when the nurse is here. I hear the doors opening and closing. Your father won't even look me in the eyes when he visits. He just talks to the walls. And Aaron. Aaron brought papers last month. I was tired, Nora. I don't remember what I signed." "It doesn't matter what he made you sign, Gran," I said firmly. "You already took care of it 14 months ago." The very next day, Wednesday, Aaron burst into the house without knocking, his car keys jingling, wearing an expensive designer sport coat and smelling of heavy cedar cologne. "Hey, Nor," he smiled arrogantly, helping himself to a drink from the fridge and leaning against the counter like he owned the place. "Just checking in on Gran. Heard you're taking some time off from your little paralegal gig." "I know about the off-market listing, Aaron," I said coldly. His smile stiffened for a fraction of a second, then quickly adjusted into a smooth, manipulative salesman grin. "Look, Nora, I know it seems fast, but you don't understand the big picture. My company is facing a massive balloon payment to the bank in exactly 6 weeks. It's $740,000. If I miss it, the bank forecloses on every single townhome project and commercial contract I have. 3 years of my hard work will be completely wiped out. This house sale solves everything. Gran goes to a nice facility, Mom and Dad stop stressing, and I save my business. Everybody wins. Everybody wins except Gran, who gets thrown out of her own home so you can pay off your debts," I replied, my voice shaking with disgust. Aaron's jaw tightened. He stepped aggressively into my space, his performative warmth instantly vanishing. "Don't make this difficult, Nora. We are family, and family helps family. The deal is basically done anyway. The closing is officially locked in for November 15th. He slammed his empty can on the counter and stormed out of the house. That night, I launched my own investigation. I ripped apart the hallway credenza until I found a hidden file folder. Inside was the weapon they thought they were going to use, a new power of attorney dated September 3rd, barely 2 months prior, naming my father, Gregory, as Lorraine's sole agent, along with a listing authorization signed by her, giving Aaron the right to act as the seller's representative. I laid the September documents side by side with the original trust documents under the kitchen light, and the difference hit me instantly. The original signature from 14 months ago was strong, confident, and perfectly executed. But the signature from September 3rd was a horror show. The lines were trembling, the loops were completely collapsed, and the pen had lifted multiple times between letters. It was the handwriting of a woman whose hand was literally being forced down onto a piece of paper. I checked my phone calendar to see what happened on September 3rd. My blood ran completely cold. September 3rd was the exact week my grandmother had been rushed to the emergency room after suffering a severe fall. My mother had texted me at the time saying it was nothing serious, but when I pulled up her official hospital discharge summary from that week, the clinical notes read, "Patient profoundly disoriented, exhibiting acute intermittent confusion. Recommend immediate neurological follow-up." My parents had literally walked into a hospital room, stood over a heavily medicated, deeply confused elderly woman who didn't even know what day it was, and forced a pen into her trembling hand to sign over her life's worth. I immediately took high-resolution photos of all the documents, emailed them to Ruth Adler, and filed an emergency, time-sensitive report with the State Elder Abuse Hotline and Adult Protective Services, APS, triggering an active investigation into financial exploitation. Ruth Adler and I had two choices. Option 1 was to file an emergency petition in probate court to block the sale. It would work, but it would be public, incredibly slow, and expensive. It would give my mother and brother weeks to hire aggressive corporate attorneys, move my grandmother to an isolated facility, and muddy the legal waters. Option 2 was pure poetry. We would let them think they were winning. We would let them walk right up to the finish line, and we would let the documents do the executing in front of everyone. November 15th arrived. 2 p.m. The closing was held at Capital Title Services on Main Street. I arrived early with Ruth Adler and her notary colleague, Nathan Pute. We took our seats in the back of conference room B. The door swung open, and my family arrived like a royal procession. My mother, Diane, walked in first, wearing a lavish cashmere blazer and her church pearls, flashing a bright, triumphant smile. Aaron followed close behind, carrying a leather portfolio like a big-shot CEO. My father, Gregory, trailed at the back, looking pale, exhausted, and staring blankly at the floor. Alongside them was Brenda Voss, the shady real estate agent, and Daniel FSY, the sharp, no-nonsense representative for the cash buyer investment group, Stonewall Capital. The moment my mother saw me sitting at the table, her face frozen into a mask of pure aristocratic rage. "Nora," she gasped, her voice dripping with venom. "What on earth are you doing here? This is a private financial closing. You have absolutely no business in this room." "I'm just taking a seat, Mom," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and steady. Linda Yates, the veteran escrow officer handling the closing, looked up from her stacks of paper, sensing the thick tension in the room. "Excuse me, who represents the seller here?" Aaron stepped forward confidently, tossing his leather portfolio onto the table. "I do. I am the seller's designated representative, Aaron Caldwell. We have a fully executed power of attorney right here, signed by our mother, Lorraine Caldwell, authorizing this sale." Ruth Adler calmly stood up, unzipped her leather briefcase, and pulled out 3 separate, certified documents, placing them squarely in the center of the table one by one. "My name is Ruth Adler, and I represent the Lorraine Caldwell Revocable Living Trust," Ruth announced with absolute authority. "And I am here to inform you that this closing is an illegal transaction." Aaron let out a loud, nervous laugh. "What are you talking about? Our power of attorney is dated September 3rd. It is the newest document. It completely supersedes everything else." "Mr. Caldwell," Ruth said, her voice dropping like a physical weight in the room. 14 months ago, on August 9th, your mother legally transferred 14 Oakwood Lane into a revocable living trust. This certified deed, recorded with the Briarwood Town Clerk, proves that individual ownership was dissolved over a year ago. A personal power of attorney grants your father control over Lorraine's individual assets, but it holds exactly 0 authority over assets owned by a trust. Only the trustee can authorize this sale." Ruth turned her head and pointed directly at me. "And the sole successor trustee of that trust is Nora Caldwell." The room went completely, utterly white-hot silent. You could hear the faint sound of the traffic outside on Main Street. My mother's face turned an ugly, mottled shade of purple. She slammed her palms flat on the maple table, her voice screeching. "This is ridiculous. This is an absolute joke. Nora is a low-level paralegal. She has no authority. My husband is Lorraine's only son, her sole living heir. Linda, ignore this nonsense and record the deed." Linda Yates, the escrow officer, didn't look at my mother. She picked up the certified trust deed, scanned the public recording stamps, and then pulled up her own internal title file. Her eyes darted sharply to the real estate agent, Brenda Voss. "Ms. Voss," Linda Yates said, her voice freezing the room. "3 weeks ago, during the preliminary title search, I flagged that this property was held in a trust. You sent my office a signed affidavit claiming that the trust had been formally dissolved and the property had been safely reconveyed to Lorraine individually. Where is the recorded reconveyance deed?" Brenda Voss's face went entirely ghost white. She began to visibly sweat, stammering over her words. Well, Aaron told me. I thought the paperwork was filed. You lied to a title insurance company, Brenda, Ruth Adler cut in seamlessly. And furthermore, we have submitted a formal neurocognitive medical evaluation from Dr. Helen Mercer, alongside a State Adult Protective Services investigation report. On September 3rd, when you forced Lorraine Caldwell to sign that new power of attorney, she was hospitalized with severe clinical confusion. She legally lacked the mental capacity to sign a contract. That document is completely void. Linda Yates immediately dropped her pen, stood up straight, squared her shoulders, and looked directly at my brother and mother. "I cannot and will not close this transaction," Linda announced with finality. "This title is profoundly defective, and this file is being flagged for fraudulent misrepresentation." Daniel FSY, the representative for Stonewall Capital, didn't say a single word. He simply reached down, closed his leather portfolio, stood up, and walked straight out of the conference room, completely killing the deal. Brenda Voss frantically grabbed her things and sprinted out behind him, terrified of losing her real estate license. Aaron fell back into his chair, his hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles turned completely white. His voice was raw, breaking with desperation. "Nora, please. You don't understand. I have a $740,000 payment due in weeks. If this cash deal falls through, the bank takes everything. I am completely ruined." My mother was crying now, loud, theatrical, messy sobs, her church pearls shaking against her chest. "Nora, how could you do this to us? After everything I have done for this family, you are completely destroying your own brother's life." I stood up, picked up my grandmother's original manila folder, and placed it neatly into my bag. I looked down at my mother, entirely unmoved by her performative tears. "You stood in her kitchen, Mom, and you told me that she wouldn't even remember her own house by Christmas. You decided that her entire life's worth had an expiration date just because she was losing her memory. You tried to sell her home out from under her while she sat alone on her birthday, and you're telling me that I am the one destroying this family? You don't get to decide what a human being is worth." My father, Gregory, sat completely motionless in the corner. He hadn't uttered a single syllable the entire time. He just stared at the certified trust document, staring at his mother's strong signature from 14 months ago, finally realizing that his mother had known exactly who he was, and had outsmarted him to protect the only grandchild who actually loved her. And the karma that followed was swift, brutal, and beautiful. Because the $680,000 cash sale completely vanished, Aaron missed his massive balloon payment 6 weeks later. The bank immediately initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings on all of his half-finished luxury townhomes and commercial properties. In January, Aaron Caldwell Properties officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. He was forced to sell his flashy German sedan. His luxury office layout was liquidated, and last I heard, he was working as a basic site manager for someone else's firm, making a fraction of what he used to make. He hasn't spoken a single word to me since. My mother's precious social standing in Briarwood completely fractured. In small towns, greedy secrets leak fast. The escrow officer documented the fraud, Adult Protective Services substantiated the elder exploitation report, and Aunt June made sure the entire family network knew the truth. The church group chat where my mother loved to brag went completely silent around her. She was quietly forced off the library board, and the wealthy friends she used to desperately impress completely stopped inviting her to galas. In the spring, my parents sold their lavish estate and moved into a cramped, depressing condo in West Hartford. My father sent me a short, 3-sentence email in March. It simply read, "I should have done more to protect her. I know that now. I'm so sorry." I read it twice, and I deleted it without responding. Some apologies are simply too late to be anything more than a cowardly record of regret. The state probate court officially voided the September documents, appointed me as Lorraine's permanent legal guardian, and confirmed my role as the absolute trustee of her estate. I deferred my bar exam, took a formal leave of absence from my firm, and moved completely into the guest room at 14 Oakwood Lane. On a beautiful, warm Tuesday afternoon in April, I baked a fresh vanilla cake with buttercream frosting. I set the old maple kitchen table from Bridgeport, the one that had survived 50 years of family dinners and one attempted family theft. My grandmother shuffled into the kitchen, her crossword puzzle tucked into her cardigan pocket. She looked at the cake, her eyes clear like creek water over gravel. "Whose birthday is it, Nora?" she asked with a sweet smile. "Nobody's, Gran," I laughed, wiping a tear from my eye. "It's just Tuesday. We're having cake because it's a beautiful Tuesday." She took a bite of the frosting, closed her eyes, and smiled. "This is my exact recipe. It's wonderful. Don't you ever change it." "I won't, Gran. I promise." We ate our cake together as the soft afternoon light streamed through the kitchen window, casting small, beautiful rainbows across the linoleum floor. The table held. A person's dignity and worth do not expire when their memory does. And sometimes the quietest, most overlooked person in a family is the only one capable of keeping watch and executing the perfect revenge. That is my story. If this video reminded you to check on your own elderly loved ones and ensure their legal protections are locked tight, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it right now. Don't let greedy people win. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought of this poetic justice, smash that like button, and subscribe to Revenge Stories for more incredible stories of pure, unadulterated karma. Thank you so much for watching until the very end, and I will see you in the next episode.